Isn't this interesting to look back in retrospect? So, a little bit about this video. First of all, I apologize it's taken so long to get this up. This conversation me and Troy had was recorded, I believe, on the... Oh, let me see. I think it was actually on either the... I believe it was the 8th of February. The 8th of February, and it's taken me over a month to get it to everybody. My apologies. This has just been very hectic, work-related, stuff like that. But it's sort of a problem, in a way, because there is stuff that me and Troy touch upon in this episode that's actually come out now. Specifically about the use of data and people's personal information getting loose via Facebook. So, in retrospect, it's kind of interesting to have seen all of that come out. Anyway, I'm sorry this has taken so long, and of course I have to consider when me and Troy are both available to deal with this. Anyway, enjoy the show. Toodles.
And hello, wary internet traveller. Welcome to the strange world. I'm not sure how you've arrived here, but no matter. Pull up a chair, get your favourite drink out, and sit back and relax. I am one of your hosts, known as NocFortuna, and I am joined as always by...
Troy Leavitts. Here I am, back again for another exciting conversation.
I do really hope so, because this is a topic that we're going to be tackling today, is one that has been playing on my mind, and something that Troy has discussed about in a few different videos, which I'll be linking down below. And that is the concept of technology, the future, and benefits as well as potential dangers that emerge from it. It's no secret at this point that robotics is just spiraling out. It's almost like the domino effect is going. Things that would have seemed so impossible a couple of years ago are now literally in the palm of our hands. As Troy rightfully pointed out in his video, where he shows advanced AI in Siri just on his phone, we are entering an age where we are becoming increasingly mechanized, where jobs that once upon a time had manpower are now being deferred to machine. And this is very exciting and also rather terrifying. Troy, what are your thoughts?
I'm glad that you mentioned Siri. So I'll just give you a little bit of background how I got interested in this topic, and then I think it'll spin off into all sorts of fun conversations. About 13, 14 years ago, I was reading a book that was released by Ray Kurzweil called The Singularity is Near, and he talked about how the different forms of technology were advancing very rapidly, and he was one of the first promoters of the idea of the singularity, where technology and humanity kind of merge into something that is indistinguishable from one another, and the future is accelerating so rapidly that we really can't see past that point. That's why he calls it the singularity. Yep. And he puts the date on that at 2040, which was pretty recent, or pretty soon, I should say, coming up. Anyway, so the reason that it was really interesting to me is because I worked in video games, right? And I had a lot of friends who were also very interested both in games and in artificial intelligence and technology. And we started having these discussions around the office about, whether or not this was even feasible. And so I started making bets with my friends because I couldn't see a clear flaw in what Kurzweil was saying. But at the same time, it seemed like, even though there didn't see anything wrong with it, it seemed kind of out there that, that things would progress that quickly. So I just started taking this bet that by 2025, we would have artificial intelligences that were passing the Turing test, meaning that they were indistinguishable, or they could fool a human into thinking they were another human if they had gotten that good, which now is only 7 years away. But I made those bets with like 4 engineers. They were all programmers, and they all thought, this is ridiculous. This is so far out. And this was before the cell phone came out, right? So there was no, or what, not cell phone, but I guess the smartphone that we have now. And so there was this, I remember the things we were talking about at the time that seemed like insurmountable. One of them was that voice recognition, the ability for language to be understood by a computer, seemed incredibly far off, only, a dozen years ago.
Yeah.
It seemed like there's no way. And now, in our modern day, even though our machines, Siri and Alexa and those sorts of things, don't really get it that well, they don't understand it at a deeper level, they are getting really good at least getting the words that you're speaking. It's not too often that they completely mess it up. When it first came out, cell phone, I think it's 2007 or something, first came out, it was messing up all the time. You would talk to it, and it wouldn't get it right ever, but now it gets it right a lot. And so there's this. That was one of the things, was that it wasn't understanding voice recognition. The other thing, and this is funny to think about, but at the time we were still wired. The internet was still all running through wires in your house, and Wi-Fi was kind of rare and isolated. And now it's piggybacked on 4G networks, 5G networks, and things. And so it's everywhere, meaning that it's more ubiquitous and can get around. So these are barriers that have knocked down just in the last 10 years in the direction of intelligence is getting smarter and faster. And I still feel pretty confident that in about 7 years, by 2025, we'll have, I don't know if it'll be commercial releases, but I feel pretty confident that somewhere at MIT and some other places, they'll be saying, hey, we've now got a machine intelligence that fools humans most of the time into thinking it is another intelligence, another human, and people are having a difficult time telling a difference, which still seems pretty close, but I feel pretty confident I'm going to start winning my dollars from these guys.
Well, that's the thing, though, isn't it, really? Everyone sort of sees things coming, but nobody really recognizes that it's coming. And technology is frightening in how fast it actually progresses. People look at things like what Robert Heinlein was writing, Isaac Asimov, and they think this is just so far out there sci-fi. This is just fantastical imaginings. Nobody could have ever predicted back then that a lot of the things that they foresaw all the way back in like the 50s and the 40s would be now in the palm of our hands, would be now things we use in our daily lives subconsciously, not even realizing it, that we're using it, It's frightening. And this is what I think one of the greatest concerns for me is that I don't think people are actually prepared for when the paradigm shift happens. We still have so many people who apply on things like general jobs, so many people that still, apply for doing day-to-day activities themselves, that when it comes to a point that, they punch in for work and it's like, oh, sorry, we've replaced you now with this, it's
right.
It's going to be like a real shock to them. These ideas have always been explored significantly. I've mentioned sci-fi, but also like sci-fi literature, but also in video games a lot. Things like Deus Ex was exploring these things. Things like rogue AI, which we're going to be touching upon, in things like obviously a Space Odyssey, and of course very famously in the System Shock games with Showdown, which was. Had you ever played System Shock games out of interest?
So what was it? System Shock 2, the scary AI. What was that one called?
No. Both of them are System Shock 1, System Shock 2 are both the scary AI.
Yeah, I played some of System Shock 2. That was a long time ago, so I don't remember it very well.
But see, now that's actually a very interesting one, because this is this idea that we were just talking about just briefly before we started this recording, which was the idea of basically an ever-learning, ever-progressing AI. Now, you mentioned when it first came out in 2007, it was very poor. I have a theory about how it actually accelerated very quickly, and it sort of ties into things like the Dragon Speech software. Are you familiar with this?
Dragon Speech?
Yeah, Dragon Speak.
I am not. Tell me about it.
Okay, so Dragon Speak software, something I'm actually familiar with because of my dyslexia, which was basically you would put it like a headphone, like a headset, and you would have to speak very slowly, very concisely, and very clearly to the computer, and then it would type the words out for you, purely just by your voice. Now, this is also this was designed, and obviously it has to collect the data in order to get your voice pattern. Even with a Cortana on Windows 10, you can actually do voice exercises to train yourself. Now, I theorize that they probably collected that data from all the different users, identifying each word's different tones and different speech pattern recognitions, and then they use that data to help enhance the AI. I can also go somewhat further with this. I also think this is what they used when they're having the voice talking back software. That started with things like Read Write Gold, which again I was also subscribed to for a while, but now things like Microsoft have it, and what you'll notice is there's a drop of different voices you can have. You can have you can have one called Hazel, one's called David, one's called Jennifer, all different tones, and you can set their speeds and everything. But that was all built up by this one. Again, I can't prove this because I've not really looked into it. But again, this is just on a gut instinct theory, I'd be very surprised if that information collected from Dragon wasn't then used by these big tech companies as a way to help advance the AI, as a way to help, have it better at speech recognition and speech speech patterns, as well as also being able to recite things in a clear and concise way to make it sound very natural. Because this is something that we've again briefly touched upon in previous issues, which is the idea of the uncanny valley, which is the idea of people having when something looks human but doesn't act human, and we have a very guttural, visceral sort of fear of it. And so when we hear something that looks human talk to us in a very static, "Hello, Troy, how are you today? You look nice. Have you been working out?" If you saw, like, say, your son talking like that to you, you'd be freaked the hell out. Because, it looks like my son, but it doesn't smell like my son, and doesn't sound like my son. It sounds like he's had some serious lobotomy, and that's why it's like some sort of microchip up there. It sounds really weird. Like some proper X-Files stuff. I think it's this sort of interconnectivity between software companies and all of that. That's sort of one of we're seeing such acceleration. Also, there's things like the military. There's also the old joke, which is any piece of AI that you see on TV that they show you, it's actually 5 years more advanced than what they're showing you. But I'm sort of dancing all over the place here a little bit, so I just want to quickly bring back to the AI. With AI, one of my greatest concerns is the idea of it going rogue, of it being infected somehow, and somehow being used, especially when you start tying it into, as you mentioned, like singularity, when you start tying it into so many functions. So, hear me out on this one, because I will admit that something me and Troy are going to be talking about is going to seem very sci-fi. It's going to feel like we're really out there, and some of you might be listening to this in volume as going, "Oh, come on, you've been watching too much X-Files, you've been watching too much Black Mirror, you need to stop reading the sci-fi books." Okay, I understand that, but here's the thing. Imagine for a moment somebody corrupts, say, Alexa or Siri. Okay, or what's the other home one they have? Alexa's Amazon.
There's what, Cortana is out there.
Microsoft one's called Cortana. Siri is Google, and I believe Alexa is Amazon.
Siri is Apple.
Oh, that's it.
Alexa is Apple. Yeah. Okay, Google, I think, is the one with the Google.
Okay,
or at least that's what you say. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know on top of my head, but anyway, imagine if somebody was to basically put a virus in that. And they could start, it could do like small innocuous things, like ordering things you haven't ordered for. Okay, so maybe if you ask it, it's like, "Hey Alexa, order me a steak," and she orders you tofu. It's a bit of a joke kind of thing. But now, what if that started getting tied to things like, say, your bank account? What if it started getting tied into things like your medication? What if it started getting tied into shows you're watching, or maybe even putting sensitive material on you? If you think of what people are able to do already, with limited access they have to computers and stuff now, could you imagine what they could do when you have a piece of software that is tied into so much of your day-to-day lives? Because you have people who sit there and actually have Alexa tied to things like, their actual mainframe in their house. So sit there and say, "Alexa, dim the lights." Alexa, put the oven on, and things like that.
If anybody's listening to this on their speakers right now, and they've got Alexa in their house, she's hearing you. So it's kind of funny, but yeah.
Yeah, see, now, right there. See, that's another thing I want to talk about in the a bit later on, because that's something that really terrifies me about this AI, and one thing I really hate, which is spyware. Which is
she's always listening, and
she's always. 1984 is happening, and it's all. And this is the genius thing about it. And I'm just putting my tinfoil hat on because it's very fetching. This is the ingenious thing about these pieces of software. Just for the record, in my Windows 10 laptop, the first thing I did was get rid of Cortana. I absolutely annihilated her from there, and it was a long process, but I did it. She's gone. She's off. Deleted her completely, and all her sub files as well. So she ain't coming back, which is good. Is basically this idea of collecting data. There's something increasingly I've noticed with a lot of corporations, especially in video game ones as well, which is this need, this obsession almost, to know you, everything about you. I'm just not referring to things like Facebook. I'm referring to things like, so many companies just to play their games. For example, I was going to play StarCraft 2 yesterday, and then I realized to play this game, I have to sign up to Battle.net. I don't want to sign up to Battle.net. I have no interest in signing up to Battle.net. You've got things like Ubisoft where you play. So we do see corporations have this real need to want to know you in a frankly intrusive way, I find. And let's go back to my point. Imagine now you have Alexa has all this data on you, and somebody hacks it, or somebody puts a virus in it, and now all that sensitive data you might need, like maybe an ointment you might need, maybe an appointment you have, maybe a call girl or a call man you've hired, that is now all in that person's hand, and it can be used against you.
Right. You've covered a lot of different entry points into the whole discussion.
Yeah, I know. So that's just my Asperger's. Sorry, that's so many. So it's honestly like a storm of ideas just bouncing around in my skull, and this is kind of, so let's try and get some focus here. Troy, pick something from all of that mess, and let's run with that.
Well, I think you're touching on this broader notion that I think is very genuine, and that is that there's a lot of fear about what this technology is going to mean for us. You're kind of going down the line of privacy concerns in particular, and what the AI and how it's always listening to us, which is going on right now. If you have one of these in your house, the microphone's always open, and so it'll sometimes think that it's heard you, or it'll think it'll hear the TV and it'll talk back to you, which will just remind you, hey, it could be recording every conversation I'm having, but supposedly it doesn't know that, or supposedly you don't know about it, I guess is the way to put that. But you hit on two parts to this that I'll divide up into two things. One is, I would say, the short-term issue, which is corporations or humans or people hacking these things for malevolent purposes, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a short-term thing that's very genuine and is probably going on right now under our noses. I'm sure that some of that is probably being recorded. I've talked about it a little bit on our discussions about loot crates and how whenever you play an online game that has these sorts of things in there, it also has data tracking in there to see every screen you're going to and everything you're doing, because it's trying to maximize its revenue return. I'm confident of that because that's it's how they make money. They want to know what you're doing and where you are, so they can squeeze every penny out of you. The other side of that, the second part, beyond what humans can do, is somewhere in the not too distant future is when AIs are kind of off the leash, and they may not be having human interests, but they'll have AI interests, and then they'll be autonomous and doing their own things, figuring out what they want to do with all this information they're collecting on you. That one's even more murky, because one of the questions I always run into is, what does an AI want? There's a book by Nick Bostrom. I think he's a professor of philosophy and cognitive science or something like that at Oxford, and he wrote a book called Superintelligence, and he spends quite a bit of time going, well, we have no idea what an AI would want, because so far we've always kind of controlled and programmed it, but if an AI ever started to develop its own notions of what's best for it, we don't know what that would be, because it's probably not going to compete with humans for like food and resources. Maybe it'll be interested in energy, but if it's simply been programmed to do something really easy, he uses this example, like make more paper clips or whatever, that's its whole job. Then it starts, converting the whole world, figuring out how to make everything into paper clips, and then we have a runaway thing that starts out from an innocuous place. But anyway, so we've got two things. One is the human impact in the short term. The other is where the AI goes in the long term.
Well, here's the other thing about that, because you mentioned about what does the AI want. Well, as we mentioned before, as I sort of discussed with you briefly before we started this recording, it can be influenced. Everyone who probably is listening to this now might remember Microsoft released a piece of AI on Twitter, just like an experiment. Within about 24 hours, Poll from 4chan had managed to make it basically espouse a lot of Nazi propaganda. It was sitting there reciting the 14 words. Right, it was sitting there talking about how the Jews controlled everything. And this was just for fun. This is just like a piece of self-learning AI that people got a hold of and managed to corrupt, in essence. It was all very humorous. It was very funny. But the thing is, once I had my belly laugh about it and sort of clapping my hands and going, GG, Poll, I love those guys. It's always so entertaining what they get up to. I sort of thought back to myself, like, now, but what if jihadists had got that and they started using it as a means to promote, like, really heavy Islamic propaganda, like Islamist propaganda? What if, right. What if, say, like, some conspiracy nuts got their hand of it? What if somebody who had firms, like, say, the pharmaceutical companies, got their hands on that? What would we be doing then? Right, yeah, these technologies in the hands of somebody with malevolent intent can go really far. And even so, have you seen the movie I, Robot with Will Smith? Yes, I have. I've read the book as well. Yeah, I read the story as well by Asimov, but I thought something they did in the movie that I don't think was in the story was a clever
way of looking at those three laws of robotics, which could apply to artificial intelligence as well, right? That you must always obey a human. Let's see if I can get these right. Unless first you have to protect yourself. Secondly, you have to protect humans, and then the third one is that if there's anything that by your negligence or whatever which would harm either of those first two laws, then you have to take that into account. If I remember right, that's a rough outstanding.
Yeah, something
but
like
anyway,
that.
The movie I, Robot is the reason that the AIs kind of go rogue. The reason that the robots go rogue is that the artificial intelligence recognizes that humans are killing each other and doing all these bad things, and so it can't allow through negligence for that to continue, and so it has to institute basically martial law by taking over the planet to force people out of their freedom into protecting all of the people on the planet. And that's why it goes off the rails, is it's actually got this higher purpose of there will be collateral damage in the short term as there's a war with humans, but in the long term, my objectives will be achieved and we will have a more peaceful planet without war and, without anybody hurting each other. And it's a really interesting way of saying, I could see an artificial intelligence doing this mental calculus or whatever and saying, we need to lock down on the humans because I'm supposed to protect them.
Right.
My job is to make their lives better, and they're off the rails, so I'm going to, bring them in. I thought that was a fascinating kind of inversion of, hey, we've got AI that's supposed to be helpful, and look, it's so helpful, it's taking away all our rights.
Right, exactly, and the thing is, there'll be people who actually want that. There are a lot of people who would, the idea of actual freedom to them is anathema. The idea of them actually having freedom scares them, because having freedom also entails having responsibility. It also it implies consequence, and that is something that some people are absolutely terrified of, which is one of the reasons why you see such a push for censorship and giving controls over to governments. But you touched on something very interesting there, which is the AI trying to remedy a contradiction, or indeed trying to remedy 2 points of contention.
Right.
Well, one of the things I always do when I'm being a smarmy git to people who I don't like, particularly when I was at university and messing with socialists and Marxists, was when they had this idea of, everyone is equal, everyone is this, and you must always try to find equality. And me pointing out that sometimes that just couldn't happen. So I put to them a sort of thought experiment, and every single time it always caused them to lock up, and they just didn't know what to do. It was hilarious. Which also sort of like...
Let's hear this, yeah.
So here goes. So I go. So here's a scenario for you. A woman applies to a workforce that is strictly informed by Islam. She is rejected because she is a woman. Whose rights do you support? Do you support the woman's rights, or do you suppose the Muslims' rights of religion?
Yeah, and I could see how for some people that would create a real problem for them, because they're living in that sense of all beliefs are equal, right? What is that called? Yeah. Kind of those progressive notions of there is no higher truth, or there is no. In some ways, I think it's almost like there's no real human rights, because it's all just about power dynamics. Yeah. And so religion is equivalent with women's rights.
It's more than that. It's the what's it called? It's the it's like something called like progressive stack or something. I think it's called the progressive stack, or the pyramid, which is basically this idea that you have people, at the very top, maybe like the cis white gendered males, and then everyone down below is like how oppressed you are. Maybe I'm misremembering this, but basically it's something like that. So when you put two people's conflicts, who you try to put, because when you have adversaries against a white person who you put all this evil on, it's very easy there to say, well, the white person's in the wrong de facto because, our ideology is drawn out of complete bigotry. But when you have two classes you're trying to protect and who you both objectify as oppressed, well, who's oppressing the oppressed?
Yes, yeah, power dynamics, right?
Right, exactly.
Who's in charge of what, and it's all about power.
And so what you would have there is she's like, well, the woman's in the right because she's being oppressed by the men, but the men are brown, and therefore being brown and Muslim supersedes her being white. And I sometimes have people ask me questions like, well, was the woman white? Was the woman, is she middle class? Is she this? Is she that? And so
trying to carve things out.
Right, exactly. And that's what I find so fascinating. That's exactly why I made them do the thought experiment, because it made them realize, some of them actually realized like how absurd they sounded. And some of them actually woke up, to their credit, just by that one little thought experiment. But some of the others just sat there and called me a racist and had done with it. It's like, okay, whatever. But
I don't want to think too much. Yeah, I could see people responding that way.
Yeah.
Now
to bring back the AI thing, what's going to happen when the AI again? So let's just go back my central point. So the AI has been influenced by somebody else. In this case, maybe not 4chan, but maybe say say let's just say like some crazy feminist Marxist, and suddenly now they're doing what we've talked about in that iRobot film. How do you think they're going to reconcile the difference? Because people killing people. How do I stop people from killing people? I'll control all people. That's quite simple actually, in a sort of bizarre way. But then when you try to quantify something as absurd and sort of labyrinthian as this idea of oppression, how do you think it would handle something like that? If at all.
If it's been put in some sort of political position or a position where it's supposed to evaluate and make a determination.
And by the way, before anyone sits there and says that that's crazy, I strongly advise you to go and actually look at things like, a Crowder. Because he actually sits there and actually talks to, I think it's Alexa, and he asks Alexa some very pointed questions. And she responds with basically pure propaganda. So when she's asked who the Nazis are, she doesn't say anything. When she sits there and asks who Muhammad is, she gives this very sort of sterile, almost like a copy print of who Muhammad is. And if you ask who Jesus Christ is, she says he's a fictional character. And whether you believe that or not is irrelevant. It's a case of it's kind of interesting how, Muhammad is seen as, this person, but Jesus, who's just as, I would argue, just as valuable and just as sentimental to people as Muhammad is, maybe more so in some respects. He's simply called a fictional character. So this idea of trying to, preserve sensibilities is kind of out the window. So don't think it can't happen, because it already is. And this is with a very limited piece of AI. Could you imagine one, say Complex from Bucky O'Hare, or Showdown from System Shock, or even some of the AI that's appeared in later episodes, like, for example, Killswitch in X-Files, or even the one that was in the first season? Could you imagine it with an agenda? What do you think that might lead to?
Right, and I think you're touching on something that's we're still talking about kind of human malevolence or human notions of prejudice and that sort of stuff that then gets instituted in artificial intelligence and then amplified, made into something that's even worse because it's so absolute, generally speaking, for most artificial intelligences. So I did watch the Steven Crowder thing you're talking about, and it is a little bit spooky to realize that something that's supposed to be neutral actually has biases that have been programmed into it about how it responds to certain questions or certain elements, and he draws that out with the whole who is Jesus Christ, and it specifically calls Jesus a fictional character,
right?
And that's like, well, where did that come from? Why does it say a fictional character when so much of the planet believes that Jesus was a real being? And you have to say, well, it's not the AI that did that. It must have been
the programmers.
Something that was the programming. Although in most cases, these learning AI, the ones that go out and read and analyze and get data, aren't really being programmed specifically, but they can be given biases to respond to things. And I think you're touching on something great, that these small little twists and turns about how data is manipulated still right now starts with humans, and those human things just get multiplied as it gets into various artificial intelligences. But I want to slightly take this just a little bit further into the future, because the stuff that you've talked on, I think
still requires a human component. You want to talk about actual AI with AI, but see, here's the thing though. AI can't exist by itself, at least not yet, and not even, I don't think, for significantly much further in the future. But the fact is, it's going to find a root. Now, let's just again, hypothetically speaking here, we have two forms of AI. We'll have AI B, AI A. AI A, it finds, say, I don't know, doctrines, sort of like an amalgamation of different religions. It takes this, processes it, and begins to think it as truth. So it begins to now try to, push the AI, it tries to push itself forward with that. It still found it from human. This has not been influenced by human, it's just been found, like human remnants. AIB, on the other hand, doesn't agree with it, and so you basically have this kind of almost, again, history repeating itself, but this time with AI rather than humans. How would you see that? Or do you think that's just too fantastical?
AI repeating itself with humans, like?
Yeah. Yeah, because
I'm sorry, you're going to have to. I'm sorry, I lost the train of thought there.
Yeah, no, sorry. It's a bit of a hard one to sort of wrap your head around, and very much me, even though I was thinking about it, I was like, oh, hold on. So, okay, so we have two forms of AI. Okay, let's just say humans are gone, humans are dead, humans are finished. We have two forms.
Okay, humans are gone. Right.
Yeah, so we have two forms of AI now, basically just existing. Let's just say we have AIA is moderates, say, it almost like moderates a planet, like it's just basically like basic living. Okay, humans are dead, but it still does all its daily functions. Then planet B sits there and tries to, say, just maintain the environment. So you have one that's maintaining humans, one that's maintaining environment. Okay? There's no influence outside of these, okay? There's just purely and simply the AI itself and the basic functions it was programmed for. Okay? Let's just say now, AI, the one that maintains the human, comes across, say, like human text, like sort of religion, like an amalgamation of religion. And from this, it begins to extrapolate and create an identity around that. Because again, it's ever learning, it's ever evolving. And it's starting to see things in here, you know, the more abstract things about existence. Because this is one of the big things about AI. Can AI develop a conscience? Can it develop a sense of self? And that's very important. You know, how...
I think I get your question. So you're talking about if humans are out of the equation, you have competing AI. Is that right?
Yes, exactly.
And so they're both vying in different directions, and so they collide with each other in terms of what we call philosophical underpinnings or something. And,
just like humans would. Just like humans would.
Yeah. I suppose that's possible. One of the things that's interesting to me about AI, and this comes from a Sam Harris talk and some of my own research, is that once artificial intelligence begins to be able to self-edit, to be able to cycle through and improve itself quickly on its own terms without needing a human to edit it or to slow it down to keep track of it, then you get a geometric progression, right, where the AI will advance very, very quickly. And the idea here, and I think Nick Bostrom also talks about this in his book, is that if one AI just starts to bootstrap us up like that, it will so quickly outdistance other AI programs that are in competition that it will dominate, because it'll be 2 times, then 4 times, then 8 times, and 16 and 32 times as fast. It just bootstraps up so quickly that that you won't probably have 2 different AIs that are at the same level of intelligence, unless they're isolated from one another. Maybe you were talking about that, AI on one planet versus AI in another, where they can't interact, so they develop on their own. But if we're talking about right now in our near future, say a decade from now, say you've got a Chinese AI and we've got one over in, say, France or whatever that they've developed, and then these start to think for themselves and they start to bootstrap, right? They start to just recursively improve their intelligence. One of those will probably be just a little bit out in front of the other, and because it's a little bit, that geometric progression will make it the dominant one very quickly. Just like human civilization. Yeah, just like human civilization. That's a good way to put it, is that, a little difference early on has these far-reaching, or if you're playing 4X games, you've got the beginning of the game, if you've got a good start and you've got the right resources, you can tear off and get out in front of everybody else very quickly. Isn't that same idea? Isn't that such a depressing thought, though? The summation of our genius, of our collective, everything we've worked towards, this machine that can think for itself, can develop and learn, proceeds to repeat and make all the mistakes we did. Wouldn't that be the biggest punchline to the joke? Yeah, that's that I haven't really thought about that way, because I tend to be on the optimistic side of this, and I don't know if that's just my own personal faith-based way of looking at things, because humans as caretakers are pretty poor. We tend to ruin things, but on the other hand, we also have really improved our society in the last 100 years. Human rights, human values have really helped. We're at this. I feel like we're at this turning point in our evolution, if you want to say, where we're starting to hand off our ability to interact with nature into this ability to act with machines. And I really do believe we're headed quickly towards this rise of artificial intelligence. And so it's going to be transformative. And humans haven't quite got their own act together. We're not quite at that point where we've got ourselves figured out. If we start handing over the reins with all of our foibles and weaknesses over to machine intelligence, would do everything even faster, do it even better, the likelihood that something's going to go catastrophically wrong is scary. But on the other hand, maybe these things will be partners with us. And this is Kurzweil's position, is that everything bad that could happen will be countered by other AI that's trying to keep things in line. He kind of uses the example of viruses, and how viruses on the internet and stuff used to be a bigger problem than they are now. Generally speaking, there's still some real issues out there, of course, but that we got better and better at protecting ourselves and building firewalls and that sort of thing, so that they're not quite as catastrophic now as they used to be. Right, but I just want to cut in there, because to me this is sort of my stance on sort of AI, which is, and
maybe this is my colossal ignorance speaking. So there probably might be people listening to this who are cracking up and going, "Ha! What a layman!" But to me, this parallels between human development and AI development is almost identical, and that's what I find very interesting. And you mentioned viruses. Now, yes, viruses that were once upon a time a big problem are no longer a problem now. But we could say the same thing about disease. Things like smallpox, we eradicated that.
Right.
But the thing is, as we now know, antibiotics are beginning to slow down, and that the disease, like viruses and diseases, are actually beginning to, evolve, and they're beginning to find ways to counteract our medication, which means we are actually creating inadvertently super strains. Now, I don't think it's so. Again, so hear me out again. So let's deal with the concept of this ever-learning AI. Is it so wrong to perceive an idea that perhaps there was an ever-learning AI that itself is corrupted, becomes a virus, and then begins to almost act like an organic matter, almost like an organic entity, not so much as in tangible organic, but behaviorally. So it begins to evolve, it begins to find ways to break and to corrupt systems as well, to spread itself, because that's its interest, tying back to that idea of interest. I'm just throwing scenarios out here, folks.
Right. What you're touching on there, I think, is kind of an interesting idea too. Is that if an artificial intelligence, say, becomes sentient, self-aware, it doesn't have to tell us, right? Mm-hmm. It could be like a virus where it sits in there and gets smarter and smarter and never reports on back to its human masters or its human until it's ready, right? It can hang back and be self-aware enough to recognize that, well, I shouldn't tell anybody in case they pull the plug on me. Yeah. So, I'll just pretend to be a little bit clueless for a while. I suppose that's a possibility in the same way that a virus gets in and infects a host. It might hang out back there. So I'm going to slightly turn this conversation because I think that it's worthwhile. So we talked a little bit earlier, or you touched on the idea of consciousness and whether or not an artificial intelligence will ever really be conscious, which is one of the most fascinating things to me about all this, because it asks the question, which is key, which is, what do you mean by conscious?
Exactly.
Well, what does that even mean to us? So just a quick thing, and then I'll let you dive in here. So psychologists have noted that humans, all of us people, have this idea of a theory of mind with everybody we interact with, right? That we assume that there's intention in the other person that we talk to, and that's how we believe that, like, you believe that I'm a real person and that I have a brain, and I believe the same thing about you. And so we project that out into the world, right? Mm-hmm. But the thing is I really don't know what's going on inside your head, right? You could be a computer for all I know, or you could have fairies in your head or whatever. It doesn't matter. All I know is it's a black box to me, and then based on your responses to me is how I determine there's intelligence inside of you. The same thing could be true of an artificial intelligence. This is what the Turing test is so great, is it says, who cares whether or not it's actually thinking inside? If it's responding to you in a way that's convincing enough that you begin to believe it's intelligence, then who cares what's going on? Because if it's really doing it, it might as well be intelligent. I like to say sentience is as sentience does, kind of a take on the Forrest Gump idea. Yeah. So that if it starts responding like it's conscious, I think we have to start granting it. Maybe it really is, even if we don't understand what consciousness is. It might be different for an artificial intelligence, but if it's responding that way, treat it like it is.
Troy, I am very human. How could you suggest otherwise? No, okay, but so this is the concept that I find fascinating as well, and it's partly because of the story I'm also writing, because I do writing in my spare time. And this is the idea of how do we identify, when do we start attributing rights to something? When do we start predicting protection to something? I think you've touched upon this as well. So,
yeah, right. Yeah.
So in the story in question, what I have here is basically we have essentially a sex robot that's been made, and her function is to basically provide pleasure to her owners. Okay, and her owners make her do a lot of very depraved things, and she begins to gain a sense of self about herself, and she realizes she doesn't like what's happening to her, and begins to feel, that she should be treated differently. She feels like she's able to process emotions and things like that, and this is all pretty stock standard stuff. But the sort of thing comes down to head, which is, when do we start attributing right? When do we start making a separation between the machine that is to serve a function and actually something that is afforded rights and protection we would give to a living, breathing entity. We have this debate already about animals. You know, some people make a strong argument for why you shouldn't eat animals because, you know, they do seem to have a sense of self and moral compass, you know, about themselves. For example, just a little aside, I own reptiles. Now, I will feed my reptiles crickets all day long and cockroaches, things like that, no problem at all, because they're basically just primitive biological machines. They haven't got a concept of pain in the same way that, say, a mammal does. But if you ask me to, say, feed them a live mouse, I won't do it, because I know the mouse will actually feel fear, it will feel terror, it'll go through all these emotions, and it will probably actually try to hurt my reptile more because its desire to live will be so great. So I will happily feed them like a cockroach or something like that, because I know that creature won't process it in the same way. Okay, it's just like literally a switch on and off. Whereas something that is quite advanced, like a mouse, will. So with that in mind, and as people say that further with things like, you know, they won't eat beef and stuff like that because they think the cows have a sense of self. You know, dolphins as well. And one of the reasons we don't like eating cats and dogs in this country is because we have a connection to them, but also we think they have a sense of self as well. They have a sense of awareness about themselves, you know, sentience. But where do we stand that with AI? With AI, so again, with this example, at what point, what would it take for us to make a separation, to sit there and say, because otherwise you're going to get almost like a class system, aren't we? And then that itself might become like the next big struggle. You know, the humans, the organics versus the inorganics. Again, I know I'm feeling like I'm really going out there with the sci-fi. You know, things like Binary Domain have touched upon this. But to me, it's just an interesting scenario, and I think it's the fascinating thing, both the really exhilarating thing about all of this is it's so interesting to think of the what if scenarios, both in its, you know, illuminating prospects, you know, but also its terrifying prospects. And think about it, you know, just go back to MGTOW for a second, and our very first topic. I could potentially create my perfect woman, you know, who would look like Elizabeth Taylor instantly, but with, you know, the kind of singing voice. You know, she could be my wife. She could like have my simulation of wounds. She could bear my children. And she could have like all the emotional responses to my needs and be in turn to her, so she can have that validation almost, like, you know, the AI is looking for your approval. But at what point when do we afford rights to that AI? You know, and this goes to the flip side to the ladies who might want to make their own man. You know, maybe want to have like a Mulder. I don't know.
A great analogy that I really like there is, you know, you're saying artificial intelligence and its ability to experience the world and to experience pain as related to organic creatures, you know, crickets and stuff. And first of all, I think it's interesting to say, well, where do we put our current level of artificial intelligence on that scale? Is it about the level of a cricket? Is it a mouse? What, you know, does it have any awareness, or is it completely, you know, subsurface? I think that's good, because at some point, based on the trajectory, I think we will start to have this notion of AI rights, like you're talking about. In fact, I think it's about a decade away that it'll become a political issue, that people are going to be on different sides of this. You already see some of it, and you mentioned the MGTOW community. I see this already talking about sex robots, where they're like, oh, they will never have intelligence. They'll just be programmed, and so it doesn't really matter. And then I watch a show like Westworld, and I'm like, are you sure? You know, like, at what point do you say these are no longer just playthings that we can do with as we want? When do they start having some sort of consciousness? And the whole thing in Westworld is also something you touched on. The idea, if you haven't seen it, and I hope I'm not giving anything away, but, you know, part of what bootstraps them from being subconscious into something more self-aware is their own capacity for suffering. You know, that as they start to be able to respond through these programs to the pain they're experiencing, it starts to try and figure out a way to undo that pain, which then gets them into a state of consciousness. So they have to suffer a lot in order to bootstrap to a level of self-awareness, which then, once they're self-aware, start to protect from pain, they become conscious. And I'm like, that's a very interesting idea.
Well, it's sort of like the trial, isn't it? To become human, you must suffer, you must experience the spectrum of being human. That means you must experience gain and loss and love and lust and hate and fury. You know, you must experience the gamma, you know, the gambit, not the gamma, the gambit of emotions, in order to get a full understanding for what it is to be alive, for what it is to be a human, for what it is to actually experience life in both its, you know, in both its ups and its downs. And I think that's very interesting. But now we're touching something a bit more philosophical. You haven't got much more time, which is a shame, because I was hoping to actually talk about robotics and the impact of people losing jobs as it becomes more mechanized, and this in proportion to the fact we have a aspiring population that is not, it's not slowing down. but indeed is still accelerating, and it's what's even worse, when that countries are naturally slowing down, like Japan and most of the developed Western world, we have this insane suicidal notion by our politicians to try and just open the floodgates and let everybody come in, even though most of the jobs that a lot of these people already have are going to be gone in the next 10 years. But I don't think we have the time to address that, so maybe that's something we can address in the follow-up episode, if you're down with that.
Yeah, we can have a follow-up episode. I actually think there are 4 technologies which I've created an acronym to remind me of what they are, that are all progressing geometrically very quickly right now, and all of them are transformative to society.
Well, let's hear it then, Troy. Let's hear it.
So the acronym is G.R.I.N, G-R-I-N, like grin at the future, smile. So G is genetics, R is robotics, I is what we've been talking about here, intelligence, and N is nanotechnology, right? That all 4 of these things are currently progressing extremely rapidly in their own direction, sometimes interacting. And we've just been talking about I. We could talk about robotics and genetics, nanotech, and how those things are transforming too. And I really do feel, because of geometric progression, the next decade is going to just be a roller coaster ride for us as people, as everybody starts to wake up to how transformative these things are.
Oh yeah.
Because So I also want a quick thing from Sam Harris. If you haven't seen his TED Talk, he talks about artificial intelligence, but he makes this really great analogy, which he's like, if we received a signal from an alien civilization, and the alien civilization says, we are on our way, we're going to arrive on Earth in 10 years, the whole planet would go, oh my goodness, we got to prepare for this, get ready, because it's just a countdown of, 120 months or whatever it is.
Yep.
But here we are with artificial intelligence, which is on the rise very quickly. Everybody's talking about it, especially in academic circles, Elon Musk. And in about 10 years from now, everybody's saying this is a real issue. It's going to be here. Mm-hmm. But we kind of think it's cute. We kind of think, it's not really that big a deal, because in our short-sightedness, we just kind of think of, day to day. Siri didn't get what I said today, so it's not really progressing. And so we're kind of, I believe, lackadaisical. But we will see a techno-Luddite movement rise in politics. We'll also see an AI rights movement arise around people who want to support artificial intelligences. And I think 10 years from now, it will be political in the same way that a lot of the things we talk about now with, say, climate change or immigration or other topics, we'll be talking about these issues.
I'm in total agreement with you on all of that. As I said, hopefully this particular episode hasn't explored my complete and utter ignorance on all of this. But I don't profess to be an expert on all of this. But it's something that has been on my mind. I think on a lot of people's mind, actually. And something that I do find myself increasingly concerned about. Because as I mentioned earlier on, we know it's coming, but we don't really realize it's coming. And now I think
it always feels like it's a long ways off. That's why I was talking about early about voice recognition and how that seemed forever off, and now here it is, and it's getting pretty good. It doesn't really understand everything, but it sure understands. Like you said, you can dictate to your machines now in a way that you're pretty confident it's going to get all the words right, even names of people. You ask it who Sigourney Weaver is, which is a weird sounding name, and it will pick it up. So yeah, it's things are developing more rapidly than our little minds can process in the short term.
And certainly much more than our politicians seem to know about. Yes,
the politicians are so ill prepared for this.
Oh God, so very, very clueless. I've already mentioned to Troy the story, and I'm just going to end it on this because I know Troy has to scarper off Mr. Got his life together. As opposed to
I have a job.
Yeah, as opposed to me, basement dweller that I am. Which is
you've got a job too, but it's just different time zones. Yeah,
it's true. But here's the I was talking to a politician about sort of the rise of AI, the rise of robotics, and what it entails for the future. And it was partly because they were advocating for for migration, and I was pointing out the dangers of unchecked migration. I've got all sorts of analogies for that, such as you wouldn't let any old person into your house or won't let them into your country, etc., things like that. But this person I was trying to talk to him about like sort of the rise of mechanization and that people being out of jobs. And so you're going to have the surplus of people without work already in the country, and now you're able to import more people who aren't going to be able to find work because it's already been taken up. And this person was saying, oh, that's impossible. That will never happen. And then I pointed out to them that even in our own country, we have things like the self-driving lorries. They've got self-driving trains in the test phase right now. And even their own phone did things they never thought possible 20 years ago in the palm of their hands. Right. And they sort of stood there gormlessly, just their little tiny brain processing what I was saying. And they were sort of like, oh, well, I suppose that's one way of looking at it. And it's sort of, oh, okay then, great, we're fucked. And on that cheery note, ladies and gentlemen, we and Troy will be returning where we will be talking much deeper about the robotics, and we will be talking much more about, the G.R.I.N concept. And you're such a smart man, Troy. You really are. So, from myself...
That was kind, thank you. I feel like I'm always just blundering my way along.
Ditto. At least you blag it better than I do, I tell you what. So, as always, it's been a pleasure to sit here and entertain you. I hope you got some good laugh out of it. I am NocFortuna. Thank you for joining me and the wonderful Troy Leavitts. And as Troy would say as we go on out...
Game on, my friends.
You're damn right. And we're out.